Welcome to Wagons West on Thursday, April 11th. And once again, Facebook is having trouble. Whatever can you do? Anyways, so one of the things that are on the agenda of a lot of people on a lot of minds here in Alberta is, and in Canada actually, is the proposed Alberta pension plan, which is, of course, Alberta would start to kind of manage its own pension plan and withdraw from Canada's pension plan. And tonight we have a special guest, Nadine Wellwood, on, a chartered investment manager that knows a lot about this subject, who's been all over Alberta and seen hundreds upon hundreds of people and talked about this topic. And she's here to tell us today about what it could mean for Alberta, what it could mean for Canada. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Also, if you're watching on whatever platform you are, I would encourage you, please, to put your questions in the comments below. And once we allow Nadine to kind of talk about herself and explain the pension plan idea a little bit, then you guys can ask your questions. And so just looking forward to tonight. And welcome, Nadine. Thanks for coming on, Nadine. I appreciate you being here tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. That was a great introduction, by the way.
Thanks. I don't plan any of it. It's just all off the top of my head, so I try not to go down too many rabbit trails.
Oh, that's good. You'll find the same with me. I'm not a very scripted person. Each time I talk, it's a little bit different.
Absolutely. Okay, so you have been all over the province talking about the Alberta pension plan. I remember you were up here sometime in February or March. You were up here in Valley View, and that was really cool to kind of catch some of what you were saying to the residents here. Maybe you can give our audience, for those who may not know who you are or what your background is, what makes you kind of qualified to talk about this? Like, what do you do? You're a chartered investment manager. What does that mean exactly? Maybe you can elaborate for us.
Sure. So a lot of people know me politically because I did run in a couple of federal elections as well as for our provincial Senate, and most recently for the UCP. So I've been politically active now for about 6 years or so. And prior to that, like many people, I just, really didn't like politics much and just sort of had to monitor it, follow it, and understand it. Because, of course, politics drives the economy, and, of course, the economy drives investing. So as a chartered investment manager, I owned my own securities investment firm. And I did that from 2019 to 2010. So 9 years there, almost a full decade. I've worked in the business now for about 20 years. And that was what actually brought me to Alberta here. And I still continue to work with some of my high net worth clients just to help them develop what I would say very similar pension style investment and retirement planning process that I take them through, not unlike that of a Canada pension plan. So 20 years in the business and the last 10 years in owning my own investment securities firm directly. And of course, Canada Pension Plan, just like every other OAS and GIS and RSPs, TFSAs, these are all the same sort of platforms that are available to retirees that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully that gives some people some sense of my qualifications and my background to speak to the topic.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I just want to encourage you today to explain it to us like you're explaining it to a 5-year-old, because basically when you're dealing with me, that's what you're dealing with. Me have hard time wrapping brain around tough things. But I came to Alberta in late 2021. And of course, in 2022, the summer of 2022, when the UCP had their leadership race, that's when I started to kind of get involved in politics in Alberta. And that's when I first started hearing about something called the Alberta pension plan, this proposed pension plan, which was kind of on the table for some of the leadership candidates to get votes to their side, because they said this is one of the things that we're going to introduce. And for a lot of reasons, a lot of Albertans are pretty fancy with the idea. And for a lot of reasons, other Albertans don't think it's a great idea. So when you've gone to the different stops across the province to talk about this topic and to take people's questions, what are some of the common themes you hear around the province in terms of support and in terms of criticism for the Alberta pension plan?
Well, I think for a lot of people, there's some misconceptions around the Canada pension plan. It's probably the biggest thing that I've been facing, there seems to be this false sense of security and this false understanding of what it actually is and what it was meant to do. So I've been spending quite a bit of my time in the beginning just offering up, what is the Canada Pension Plan, and trying to get people to think about why should we stay with the Canada Pension Plan, because I mean, it's really easy to stay with what you know, and sometimes a little bit harder to accept something that's new and novel for people, not understanding the benefits that it could offer. But more importantly, I think it's more important for people to understand not only what they could gain with the Canada Pension Plan, but I personally see a lot of opportunity to mitigate a lot of risk by leaving the Canada Pension Plan. And so, I usually start my conversation with, what is the Canada Pension Plan? And, there's this myth that I think has been busted in the last few years around the Canada healthcare system. It used to be the best in the world. Remember that statement? And, I would say the Canada Pension Plan, I always tell people, is it possible that just like, Canada has the best healthcare system in the world, that's what we've been told, but is it necessarily true? And so getting people to think a little bit outside of the box and think about, why would we stay with the Canada Pension Plan? A lot of people just want to stay because it's what they know. There's a familiarity there with it. I did have one gentleman tell me that there was no risk with the Canada Pension Plan. And of course, there's a risk anything you do, especially investing. It doesn't matter whether it's an investment with the government or investment in the private sector. Every investment that you make is always going to come with certain risks. And, I usually start the conversation with, what is the CPP? Is it truly a pension plan, or is it something else? Because if you consider what the intention in 1966, when the Canada Pension Plan was started, its actual purpose was to reduce poverty. So that's a far cry from a retirement or a pension plan that you and I would establish, for ourselves, is hopefully we're going to live beyond the poverty line. But that was its purpose. So it's a social benefit program. And it is a pool of assets right now, because in 1997, they did make some changes to it that included the CPP investments, now used to be called formerly CPP IB, the investing board. And it's a pay-as-you-go system. So before 1997, there were no assets to speak of. It was a pay-as-you-go. What ended up happening was, an investor today or contributor today was paying for retirees, and then there was no assets to speak of. So it was, if you think about, I hate using the word a Ponzi scheme, but for lack of a better word, let's use that. A Ponzi scheme is when you take from somebody today that's invested and you give to the person who you paid out yesterday. Well, the government calls that a pay-as-you-go system. They're not the only pension plan that does that, but that's in essence what it is. And there's two pension plans right now. There's the base CPP, and then there's the enhanced CPP. The base CPP applies from $3,500 to $68,000 and $500. And then what happens is now they've had to add an additional CPP because they don't have enough money, enough contributions to continue to pay on this pay-as-you-go system, just with the base CPP. So they have this enhanced now that's going to apply from $68,500 to $73,200 this year, and that will go up next year to $78,000. So it's not what people think of as, I hear a lot about, don't touch my pension plan. Well, it's not your pension plan. It's actually a government-owned asset, and the government changes the rules as they see fit, like they did back in 97, and have proposed changes ever since to either increase contributions or reduce benefits. Why? Because they own it, they control it, and it's a benefit plan. The maximum contribution that you make in 2024 is $8,110, but the maximum benefit that you can receive is $1,364. Now, most people will never receive the maximum just because the way it's calculated. And the average as of today that the average contributor to the Canada Pension Plan receives is $831.92. So
That's not a whole lot.
yeah, it's not a whole lot. It's not something that you would, hopefully you're not relying on it for your retirement. And around the poverty reduction plan, it's really funny that they chose the Canada Pension Plan to justify its existence, because it would have made more sense to use the old age security, OAS, because if you've never contributed, let's say you've never worked, you've never contributed to the Canada Pension Plan, you're not eligible for it. So, the OAS, everybody is eligible. And so from a reduction of poverty perspective, it would have made a lot more sense to use the OAS as a tool to reduce poverty rather than the Canada Pension Plan.
One of the things that I can't help but think about when it comes to the Canada Pension Plan is, sorry, I'm hearing myself echo there. One of the things I think about when it comes to the Canada Pension Plan is the population and how it's kind of designed to kind of work on that triangle where you have that kind of increasing base of people, right? But now we're kind of inverted, right? Because we're having fewer and fewer children. And so there's the pension plan is basically, we're depending on a smaller subset of people to kind of prop up a larger generation up top. So, that can't go on indefinitely. So what do you think about that?
Demographics plays a huge part in any pension plan, and in particular the Canada Pension Plan, because it has to support 22 million Canadians that are contributing to it. And you're right, we do not have the population underneath the aging baby boomers that we have now set to retire to continue this pay-as-you-go system, which they recognized that early, and that was thus the reason for making the changes in 1997. They knew it was unsustainable. It was actually set to run out of money come 2015 originally, and they have since restructured it, put the CPPIB in place, and we're reinvesting surpluses to maximize returns so that they have this little bit of a slush fund that would extend the sustainability of the Canada Pension Plan. But the reality is, even as of 2026, the expenditures will once again exceed the contributions. And that's after making massive changes to the contribution rates. They've gone from like 5.6% back when they proposed the changes up to now 11.9%, plus the enhanced at an additional 4%. So really what's happening is we have are taxing our younger generation to pay for benefits of retirees. And those retirees paid far less in expense out of their pocket for prior generations of retirees. So we have today, right now, a young generation that literally is being taxed very heavily. And that's not even funding their retirement. That's just funding the retirement of the people today and our seniors today.
Yeah. So not only is it a shrinking added pressure, because not only is it a shrinking population, those demographics, but it is the dollar currently, because of previous tomfoolery, is a shrinking value, right? We have massive inflation happening, which is going to basically take away a lot of the distance that dollar can go.
Yeah, well, one of the things I like to talk about are the risks associated with the Canada Pension Plan, and the Chief Actuarial Report dated December 31st, 2021. It's the 31st report. And the Chief Actuarial does an audit of the Canada Pension Plan every 3 years. And they of themselves actually highlight the 3 biggest risks to the Canada Pension Plan. And the first one, obviously, demographics, which we've talked about. Canada doesn't sit in a very good position demographically as far as the Canada Pension Plan goes, but Alberta actually bucks that trend because we have a very young population that work a lot more hours and are far more productive. And because our population is increasing at a rate that is somewhat more sustainable than Canada, actually Alberta is in a far better position and would actually mitigate a tremendous amount of risk by starting its own Alberta pension plan.
Whoop, there we go. Excellent. Now, when we're talking about the CPP and the Alberta pension plan, you had sent over a document there, and I was hoping we can, well, I misspelled that. Comments, guys, put it in the comments. I hope we go through the document. You can walk us through.
Sure, of course. I think one of the first slides I sent you over was, what if you could do it yourself? I get this question quite a bit from people, and it's the $8,110 is a lot of money, right? And now that is a combined contribution between you and your employer. You each pay in 5.95% for a total of 11.9. And now, in addition, you will pay in that additional enhanced CPP, you'll pay an additional 4%. But just that $8,110, if you break that into 12 equal payments, that's $676 each and every month, that if you and your employer still continued to contribute that, and you started at the age of 20, you did that for 45 years. So, and it earned, let's say, just a modest 5% rate of return. You would end up in 45 years in your retirement fund with $1.33 million. And if you take a look at that, your contributions are $365,000 of that. The rest of it is all interest. Einstein used to call compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, because it truly is. And if you look at what $1,333 on a monthly basis gives you, is $8,000 a month for an income all the way through to the year that you turn 85. So for 20 years, you could actually live off of $8,000 a month. Again, remember, the maximum benefit that you're going to receive from Canada Pension Plan is $1,364, and you don't own it. You don't get to say how much you can hand down to your spouse or how much you can hand down to your kids. The death benefit is $2,500, which is not even enough to put a person in the ground today. And then for a lot of people who think, well, okay, 85 is not long enough. If you want to plan out to 95, well, that's still $6,200 a month for 30 years. That's a far cry from, $1,365 a month.
Yeah.
And, if you think the government's not smart, the government is incredibly well-versed in the statistics of age and death and so on and so forth. If you think about the average life expectancy is 83 years old, even if you were to receive the maximum contribution to your CPP, that's still only $295,000. So you would have been much better off had you actually taken this money, your employer matched it, and put it into your own retirement savings plan. Because for so many people, they're like, don't touch my CPP. But the problem is that, again, it's not yours. And more importantly, you would have been able to do much better with this money on your own. And then there's no doubt that you could have handed this down to your spouse. You could have handed this down to your kids. You have complete flexibility as to what you can do with it, how much you can spend. If you want to spend a little bit more in those early retirement years when you're traveling, you're still healthy, you're still active, and then less in the later years, as opposed to this fixed lump sum that, or fixed, monthly income that the government is going to allot you. And you'd have to live to almost 86 years old just to get your contributions back.
That's terrible, man. Oh, here we go. There's the risks you're talking about. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's the bottom one. We should talk about that too.
Yeah. So immigration, if you go to the next slide, I think it talks a little bit more about, I think you might have skipped one there. It says adding more people does not equal higher standards of living.
That one. And then that one's the next.
No worries. Okay. Well, on the immigration side, right now, the federal government's policy is just to keep adding people, just flood more and more people, because there's only one of three ways to fix the Canada Pension Plan. The first one is you can increase the contribution rates, which they are doing, and they're going to continue to have to do this more and more, which again means our younger population is going to have less and less money in their pockets and are going to be financing retirees at a far greater rate than the retirees in the past have had to do. And what's happening is, by adding more people, it's not actually helping the situation. Because what's going on right now is we have what's called a population trap, as it's been coined by the National Bank economists. And this population trap basically states we need to limit immigration if we want to escape it. And the population is growing currently so fast that all our available savings are being used to maintain the existing capital labor ratio. So what it basically says is that our younger generation has absolutely zero hope of increasing their standards of living.
Yeah, I read that we recently just passed 40 million, and then like basically like half a heartbeat after that made it to 41 million. Like our population growth is almost exponential at this point.
Yeah, you can't add 1.2 million to a population of 40 million people. It just doesn't work. We don't have the infrastructure or the ability or the savings or the capital to keep up with that rate of explosion in our population. And so it's actually creating more and more problems, which I laugh because, of course, Trudeau is running around at the moment and he's promoting all these build more homes, do this, do that. We couldn't build enough homes if we had all the resources, even all the money, everything. That wasn't an issue, which we can't spend our way out of this. The problem is we just have too many people coming into the country too fast, and our infrastructure is just not suited to be able to keep up with the demand, and thus everybody's standard of living is being decreased. It's called, if you take a look at GDP, you'll see it in the news today. Everybody's talking about GDP. And that's gross domestic product. And that's the productivity of the country as a whole. And Trudeau's been touting, oh, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. Well, yes, it may be going up, but it's not what really is important to the citizens of a country. You want to measure those things that add value and improve the quality of life of your citizenry. And so that would be the GDP per capita. So are the quality of life of the individual persons who are working and contributing, are they actually seeing an improved standard of living? And we're actually seeing the exact opposite. And so with the OECD prediction that you have up there, Canada is going to be one of the worst performing countries. And I shouldn't say one of the worst. Actually, the OECD actually predicts the worst performing country all the way through to the year 2060. And so that's a huge risk to the Canada Pension Plan. That's a huge risk for Albertans who have an opportunity to leave today and get out of the Canada Pension Plan and actually secure greater financial security by actually establishing their own Alberta pension plan.
Now, I hope to assuage people's fears about the Alberta pension plan through the course of this episode, but I can understand someone being reticent to kind of cut their losses like this, especially if they've been putting into something their whole life. But when you look at a chart like this, you can see that, like, I maybe if I'm 85 years old, I'm not thinking to 2060. I get that, but if you want to leave a country at all for your kids and for your grandkids, then it's something to consider. I understand it's hard to walk away from something that you put so much money into, but it would suck just to waste even more.
Well, the thing is you're not walking away from the money you've put into it. So Alberta would be entitled to the assets that it has contributed to the Canada Pension Plan. And so what we're actually doing is transferring the assets from Canada as a whole to Alberta, and Alberta only has 2.5 million contributors, 2.5 million contributors that it has to finance and fund in its own Alberta pension plan, unlike the 22 million that Canada would have to finance. And right now, it's actually Albertans that are financing retirees in Newfoundland, Labrador, in PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. And, that's the part that people don't seem to realize. You're not losing anything. We're actually going to get that money back from the Canada Pension Plan. But we're going to talk here in a little bit. We don't even really need anything to do this. We could start this tomorrow from nothing, and it would still actually benefit Alberta. Now, the slide you have up right now, I put this one in because it's fascinating, because this is not a new topic of conversation. This one was done back in 2010 by Newfoundland and Labrador Employers Council. And I like to point this out because there's unseen consequences to people's actions, to government's actions, government's regulations, government's policies that nobody really understands, because it's not an instant correlation. It's not action and then consequence. Sometimes these consequences take not only years, but sometimes decades to play out. And so with this one here, Newfoundland and Labrador actually did not vote in favor of making the changes back in 1997 to refinance the CPP by increasing the contribution rates and by reducing benefits, which is what in essence happened. Here they point out some really good reasons why they did not. And the thing is it increased the employer cost and labor costs, and it reduced the demand for labor. So in essence, what happened was it increased mandatory payroll tax that detrimentally affected the payroll budgets of every business in Canada. Right. So you have to remember that every dollar that you put in, an employer has to match. Well, you're one person, but if you're an employer, let's say just a small business, and you run a little restaurant and you've got 15 employees, now you're having to match that for 15 individuals. Now combine that with the wage increases and everything else they've been doing, and that's a huge burden on a small business owner. And then they also talk here about recovering the share of the tax increase in the form of higher prices on goods and services. Well, if I'm going to increase your costs by $1 as a business owner, that dollar has to get flowed through to the consumer. So now you as a consumer are going to pay more for those goods and services. And I love this because they point out the end result, increasing CPP premiums, increased inflation. And what are we seeing today? Huge increases in inflation. Now, this is not the only reason, but it is certainly part of the reason, and results in job losses for Canadians. We're seeing in GDP per capita lower productivity per individual because of the increase in population. But you also have a federal government that's extremely hostile to the economy. For example, how many times do we refuse to send LNG now? Three countries have come to us begging for our natural resources, which would have a huge impact on increasing the productivity in Canada. And yet we have the Deputy Governor General of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, having to go around saying we're in a productivity crisis. And we're only in a productivity crisis because we have a federal government that is completely anti-productivity. Every policy they have put out, everything they have done, in particular the Liberals, but it goes beyond that. Goes back to like the early 2000s that our productivity has been going down, but it has been really exasperated since the Liberals took control. And productivity is at an all-time low, to the point now where you even have Bank of Canada staff speaking up saying, this is a crisis.
Not to mention the last few years of this Tijuana donkey show we've had has really incentivized laziness and not working. Right? I can stay and do nothing, and the government is going to take care of me like a good daddy.
Yeah, well, the political class, and I'm going to quote the OECD again, really have said that, the political class appear to have lost interest in efforts to raise workers' productivity and real wage growth. And what they've been focusing on are policies that don't work. And that's monetary policy, fiscal policy, trying to break record immigration levels. And one of the other things that they had was a national daycare policy, trying to bring more people back into the workforce. These are just lame efforts that really have those unseen consequences that take some time to foresee. But the reality is they don't work. And with the Canada Pension Plan, either you can increase the contribution rates, you can decrease the benefits, or you can decrease the number of people that are benefiting from it. And so, some people bring up MAID, and they have this big push today right? I mean, you're depressed. Oh, have you considered MAID? Well, the reality is if they can actually reduce the number of people who would benefit and draw on the Canada Pension Plan, that's to their benefit.
The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, Nadine. I say that in almost every episode now in a different context, and it holds true. CPP unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, this is a big one that most people don't know, and they don't want you to know. This number is buried in the Chief Actuarial Report under acknowledgements. Not exactly where you would expect to find a critical component to a pension fund like unfunded liabilities. Unfunded liabilities have probably destroyed more defined benefit pension plans than any single thing that has occurred. Why? Because it's a drain on the resource, especially for pay-as-you-go systems. Because what happens is, think about it this way: if you have a mortgage, you own a home, let's say your home, you have a beautiful mansion in the mountains, it's worth $3 million, but the mortgage is $12 million. Right? At some point, the bank goes, hey, you know what? We got to call in the loan. You know, you need to pay up the $12 million. Well, what happens? You don't have the assets, the resources to do that. So Canada Pension Plan, CPP Investments, likes to boast about their $590 million in assets that they have. There's your assets, there's your house that you own. But what they don't tell you is the 1.14 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Now that number is as of 2021. That number has gotten worse. And that number is up from the 2019 number of 884 billion. And so I tied that in with the 2026 expenditures exceeding the contributions, because no longer now do we have the pay-as-you-go function being able to finance on a one-for-one basis the number of people contributing to the number of retirees we have. So what is that going to do to the unfunded liabilities in that year? They are just going to balloon and spiral out of control. So, you know, one of the good questions that have really come up with respect to this, and I've actually put this back to the government here in Alberta, is what would Alberta's share of that unfunded liabilities be? Because we have been in a surplus position for so many years, over contributing, and I'll say disproportionately contributing to the Canada Pension Plan. And that's not an answer. They don't have an answer for that themselves yet. So I'm waiting to get that answer myself.
Is this corruption competence issue, or both and?
What happened, this was never fully funded right from the beginning, and it was very short-sighted. So you have to remember, they tied the Canada Pension Plan to the benefit that you would receive back in 1966 when you signed up for your social insurance number. So this really was a carrot that was dangled to get you to sign up for your social insurance number. And then what ended up happening is it's never been properly funded. So it is truly incompetent. And it was a bad system to begin with. And of course, the government never likes to admit mistakes. They just continue to slap band-aids onto everything. So rather than actually address the problem and, you know, make some decisions as to how to fix it properly for the long term, every government just kicks the can further down the road and says, hey, I'm only here for 8 years. That's the next government's problem, next government's problem, next government's problem. Unfortunately, it always becomes the taxpayers' problem, and taxpayers are going to have to wake up to the reality that, you know, all these unfunded, and this is just one of many, OAS, healthcare, the list goes on and on. Combine that then with the debt that Canada has, we are not sitting in a very healthy financial situation.
Ignore the engine warning light at your peril, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is not just, hey, we're having a blip on the engine light. This is a sincere, true, the engine is about to blow up. We need to stop. We need to reevaluate the problem and actually come up with real solutions. But that, unfortunately, is not going to happen at the federal level. They just want to ignore the reality, and because nobody wants to talk about it.
Uncomfortable truths, Nadine. How did LifeWorks get to 334 billion by 2027?
So this is a fantastic question, because so many people have argued that the LifeWorks report is fake news, it's fake numbers. There's no way that Alberta could be entitled to 53% of the assets owned by CPP. Well, that's actually not true. So the Canada Pension Act is very clear in specifying how we came to this number. And the equation is such that it's section 113, by the way, 2A of the Canada Pension Plan Act. Anybody can go look it up. Contributions less any money that has been paid out, the benefits to the retirees, right? Less any administrative costs proportionate to the number of people. And then, of course, you have to add back in any investment returns. Well, because Alberta is younger, we work more, and we have higher incomes, we have disproportionately contributed to the Alberta pension plan by $60 billion. Now, $60 billion compounding year over year, seeing in where the surplus, that adds up very, very quickly. So you can see how we very quickly got to 334 billion. The other thing that the NDP is like to point out is that, oh, this is very biased. This is not a real report, a real number. Well, the report was done by LifeWorks. Who is LifeWorks? LifeWorks was Morneau Chappelle. Who's the Morneau there? Bill Morneau.
Bill Morneau.
Liberal, not even a conservative. I'm sure he went back and like double, triple, quadruple checked these numbers himself. As the Liberal finance minister was like, wow, is this really true? Well, it is. And then some people are saying, well, that's not the intention. Well, I like to quote here Ontario Premier John Robarts, because this is very clear and very precise in the language about what the intention was at the time this document was signed. And the Ontario Premier at the time, John Robarts, wanted to protect the constitutional position that they had, ensuring that if at any time in the future Ontario wanted to leave the Canada Pension Plan, that they would be able to do so. And every province is entitled to leave should they wish to do so. But they wanted to be placed in precisely the same financial position as if this province had operated on identical but a separate plan from the onset. Because you have so many people today arguing that, well, individuals each contribute the same. The formula is the same for everybody. That's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth, because it's an Alberta pension plan. So Alberta, because we have a smaller number of people, retirees, we only have about 64 cents of every dollar that we are giving to the federal government that actually comes back to this province to fund our own retirees. So that surplus would be staying here in Alberta if it was our own Alberta pension plan.
So that's basically like another, like
that's an equalization.
Another 50%, basically.
That's an equalization payment.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask everybody here in Alberta, you know, if you had the opportunity to stop equalization payments tomorrow, I'm sure there's not a single person out there that would say, yeah, no, don't do that. Let's keep paying more than we need to. The reality is the Canada Pension Plan, we are sending $3 to $5 billion more to fund other retirees in other parts of Canada that we could be leaving right here and funding either through lesser contribution rates or better benefits, and or just better fully funding our own pension plan.
With what Premier Danielle Smith has said about kind of doubling down on resource revenue right now, like with the oil and our gas, kind of we're going to have this decade of this heyday. But then she even herself said that they want to go net zero by 2050. And I'll say this here. I remember hearing her at a campaign stop in August. It was August 5th, 2022. If anyone was there, they'll remember. And she was asked about this, asked about her net zero. What she was saying then, I guess, wasn't a policy quite yet, but she said that well, Alberta is actually already net zero because we have so many grasslands and forests and all this stuff. We are already basically a carbon sink, which is not exactly how it's being worded now. But if we do kind of get off of fossil fuels, what do you think that's going to do to the Alberta pension plan potentially?
There is no way we are getting off of fossil fuels anytime soon. If you look at the demand for oil and gas, and especially LNG, which is such a clean burning fuel, if Canada, if Alberta were truly serious about helping global emissions, we would be exporting our LNG to every country we could, especially countries like China, which are basically still being fueled. Their energy main source is coming from coal. Coal burns dirty, right? Far less clean than LNG. And so there is going to be no shortage of demand. Like I said, look at the 3 countries that have come to Canada. Greece was the most recent one, but Germany, of course, the Chancellor of Germany, and I do believe Japan, and they all wanted our LNG. And there's no shortage. There's a shortage in supply, in my opinion. I don't see any, lack of demand from the economy. And you have to understand too, Alberta's economy is not just oil and gas. I mean, we have a pretty strong economy in a number of other different sectors, including other natural commodities, but also, we have a small finance sector. We have a small, the biggest threat to any economy, honestly, is government. The government keeps expanding and expanding, but the government does not add anything to the bottom line. It's not adding any productivity, because that can only come from the private sector. So, that's probably the biggest risk to any economy. And Danielle, unfortunately, is not reducing or restricting the size of government. She's been expanding it as well. And that's one of the things for me I would love to see at the next AGM, is for people to start putting pressure on her to start reducing the size of government, not expanding it.
Because that's yet another expenditure. How many government employees does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's a question that I haven't been able to answer yet.
Well, a big one is people look at it and they go, well, government employees pay taxes too. But the problem is they're paying taxes with tax dollars.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So it's like, I've already given you my tax dollars. That's where the productivity was. As a private individual out working in the private industry, there was production, right? So I gave the government $1. Now the government takes that dollar and gives it to a government employee who they give 34 cents back. It doesn't make any sense. There is no productivity there. There's no value add. So government is probably the biggest expense to every Canadian and every Albertan today. I see you have comparable pension funds up here. This is a fun slide, actually. Because, the CPP likes to boast that they're the only ones, look at how great we are. Look at the great returns we've had, everything that we've been able to do. But the reality is there's other pension funds out there that are able to compete and do similar things. Anybody who works in the industry, this is not rocket science to them, buying and selling and opportunities. Really what you want with a pension plan is access to opportunities, right? So they say, oh, you need to be large to weather the storms, and you need to be large because you want to money, the amount of dollars in there makes sense. Well, 590 billion is only good from a standpoint, in my perspective, that of getting access to opportunities. And if Alberta had 334 billion of that, if they even had $3 billion, you're going to get access to opportunities, right? But this is where I came back earlier to 22 million members. If you take a look at, for example, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan here, it's only $250 billion, but it only has 336,000 members. That's $744,000 per member. The Canada Pension Plan has $590 billion in assets under management, but it has 22 million contributors, members. That is only $28,818 per member. Does that sound like it's very financially secure to you?
Oh, that's not even a year's salary. That's like a third of a year's salary.
And now combine that with the fact that come 2026, those expenditures are going to exceed the contributions, and they're going to be dipping into that $590 billion. So
I was just going to say, just reminding me here, when I look at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, the BC Investment Management Corps, Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement, I look at these different pension plans, and I think about the people in Alberta who are, lamenting the Alberta pension plan. Don't take my CPP. Danielle Smith wants it to line her own pockets, or whatever they're saying. And I think of the Alberta Labor Union, or the Alberta unions generally, and how they're also kind of obviously in cahoots with the NDP, and so they're anti-Alberta pension plan. But what they're not saying is they also have themselves a pretty great pension plan that your average Albertan doesn't have. So they can afford to talk trash about the APP because they're not necessarily the ones who need it.
Well, that's a really good point, because 96% of government employees will receive a public pension plan. And so, yes, this is very much a greater concern for the private sector than it is for the public employees. But I don't understand why anybody would reject the Alberta pension plan. It just doesn't make any sense to do so. We could significantly reduce our risk by going with an Alberta pension plan rather than staying with a Canada pension plan. And every Albertan, every single Albertan here in Alberta would benefit from that. Whether you're with a union, whether you're got another pension plan, this just would help secure your financial, future that much more.
That's right. So here we have the first slide, which kind of outlines the nuts and bolts of an Alberta pension plan. Can you walk us through these numbers?
Well, if you go back to the starting from nothing slide that I had given you.
Right there.
So
this one?
We're going to go, I'll talk about if you start with nothing. So Alberta could technically leave the Canada pension plan tomorrow. We are not going to get a number from the federal government easy. So they're going to want to drag their heels. They're going to want to delay as much and as long as they can, because again, they don't want to deal with this issue. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that this could happen, let alone will happen, hopefully. If we left tomorrow, that's a savings of $3 to $5 billion each and every year that Alberta would keep in its own pocket. So that at a 6% rate of return, let's say in 30 years from now, because nobody is going to argue that our demographics, the economy, all these things for the foreseeable future in Alberta is going to change. And the demographics, at least 3 decades. So what would that look like in 30 years? Well, that's $237 billion, starting with nothing. Now, we are entitled to something from the Canada pension plan, right? And let's say the Canada pension plan said, hey, you know what? We're going to give you $120 billion. Go away. That's the low end. So if you looked at anything that Trevor Tome has been saying, he said, on the low end, probably 120 to 150 billion. So if you're looking at this slide here, that's the number I went with. I said, look, what if we were to receive $120 billion from the federal government, from the CPPIB, and we invested that, and we only have 2.25 million members, right? And right off the bat, we would all be twice as rich, because that's $53,000 per member. And that's just simple math. Take your, 120 billion divided by 2.25 million, and that's the number you get. So the Canada pension plan, as of today, after all of those years of the money's been invested, each Canadian is worth $28,000. If Albertans were to leave tomorrow with $120 billion, with the number of contributors we have, each contributor is worth $53,000. So we're already twice as rich.
Amazing.
Investing that money, let's say nothing changed. This money it continually invested. It earned 6% per year, which is what the chief actuarial report suggested for the Canada pension plan, which is why I used it. In 10 years, that's 113,000. 20 years, that's 220. In 30 years, each member would be worth $412,000. Now, this would mean making zero changes to the Canada pension plan. We would pay the same contribution rate. It wouldn't go up. It wouldn't go down for the next 30 years. Same benefits, same everything. But the reality is we are now fully funding, getting closer to a fully funded pension plan.
Amazing.
So our younger generations in particular have far greater financial security in this than they would a Canada pension plan.
What percentage is this here? What percentage goes in from Alberta versus the rest of the provinces right now?
Alberta has over-contributed significantly to, and I keep saying over-contributed, disproportionately contributed as a province to the tune of $60 billion. And over the last 6 years, it's been $20.5 billion. So that's a significant amount of money. And that money, again, it's like an equalization payment that goes to the Canada Pension Plan, in addition to the equalization plan payment that we send to the federal government directly.
Oh, I see one of our viewers there. That's actually my wife. Just asked that question there, which is basically the same thing, which was like that disproportionate contribution.
Well, like I said earlier, for every dollar that an Albertan sends to the CPP, we only get back 64 cents to pay for our own retirees. So that's 36 cents that we're, surplus that the Canada Pension Plan has been investing, but that's money that belongs to Alberta that should be staying right here in this province.
So Quebec has a pension plan, am I correct?
Yes, Quebec has its own. It never joined the Canada Pension Plan, so it's never belonged right from the very beginning.
And yet Canada still hasn't fallen apart.
Well, what's really funny? If there's a dollar to be made, Quebec's usually the first one in line to take it. And I always tell people, Quebec banging on the door to get back into the Canada Pension Plan. So use that as a little bit of a red flag, I would say.
Yeah. Now, considering how much Alberta pays into the pension plan, or a Canada Pension Plan to be more specific, we can kind of obviously understand how the rest of Canada is a little kind of sweating a little bit right now, because if Alberta pulls out, then that's a lot of the contribution that they're not going to get. And I don't know what they think is going to happen, because as you've kind of laid out already, Canada Pension Plan is a dying animal. And if Alberta left, it might just put it out of its misery, which is kind of the great, the merciful thing to do. What do you think would happen to Canada? Or just the Canada Pension Plan specifically, if Alberta did pull out and do its own Alberta pension plan? Well, not just what's for Alberta, what's happening to Canada now?
Yeah, so if you look at what's going to happen to Canada, I'm going to be a little more pessimistic than what Daniel Smith has said. It's going to be more than just, I think, a percentage point increase in contribution rates. Because the reality is, come 2026, the expenditures will exceed the contributions, and that's with Albertans contributing. So if you withdraw that, that significant amount of contribution, that's really going to sort of highlight the problems with the Canada Pension Plan and the pay-as-you-go. In which case it's going to force a far greater contribution rate, or they're going to have to decrease the contribution, the benefits. Because there's just no way to fix it the way any other way. And politicians don't want to talk about this, because, of course, they don't want it to be their problem. They just want it to kick the can down the road further and further, making it somebody else's problem. They don't want to fix it. So, it will hurt Canada. There is no doubt about it. The current retirees won't have anything to worry about, because there are $590 billion in assets. Ignore the unfunded liabilities. They'll go through those. Just let the unfunded liabilities continue to grow. And the people who are retired today will probably be fine. It is the future generations. Those are the ones that are going to be left holding a very hefty tax bill to either finance and fund, or it'll collapse altogether, in my opinion.
Provided, so speaking on a national level, provided we get that kind of conservative supermajority that we're all kind of anticipating, for better or for worse, Pierre being an Alberta boy, or at least being from Alberta, we'll say more accurately, and being conservative and having that good relationship with Premier Smith, do you think, what do you think is going to happen? Because I can see, obviously, as the Prime Minister, he's going to want to keep us in the Canada Pension Plan, and we're obviously at odds with that because of what's good for Alberta. What do you see happening there? What dynamic is at play? You've been around these people, these politicians, and also another person, Maxime Bernier, who I know that you're friendly with. And what do you see playing out there as we come through 2025, I guess it is, when we have our election?
Well, I did a great interview with Maxime already. And like he said, as far as the premier of a province goes, their responsibility is to act in the best interest of their own citizens. And so Danielle Smith should be continuing to move forward and push on this Alberta pension plan, in my opinion. I have already had people come to me, small groups, have spoken to Jason Nixon, for example, who sits in her cabinet and MLA for the UCP. And he has already said that if Pierre Poilievre, actually didn't say, he said when Pierre Poilievre wins the next federal election, the Alberta pension plan will go away. That's a very dangerous statement for me, because that means they are playing politics. This is not about the best interest of Albertans. And that was very disappointing for me to hear. This is the absolute best thing that Alberta could do. And you're right, Pierre Poilievre is not going to want us to leave. I don't think he'll throw his support behind this. And the reason being is because it's going to hurt Canada, and his job is to protect the interests of all of Canada. And in particular, as the Prime Minister, I don't care whether you're from the East or the West, the reality is you have to appease Quebec and Ontario if you want to get reelected 4 years from now. And so that's the harsh reality that we in the West have to come to grips with, is that it doesn't matter whether we had Stephen Harper for 8 years. What changed for Alberta? Absolutely nothing. It gave us a little bit of grace for 8 years. That's about it. And he's the one who actually increased the equalization payment, making it harder and harsher on Albertans. And I can go on and on with different policies that they've done. But the reality is, Alberta has and should be taking care of itself, and our premier should be acting in the best interests of Albertans. And an Alberta pension plan, as I hope I clearly demonstrated for the people watching tonight, is definitely in the best interest of Alberta.
We really are, like lemmings or sheep, or lemmings, I guess I'll use the example, just like being so tribal and just doing this course of action, even if it's destructive, self-destructive, right? We'll run right off that cliff because everyone else is. And it feels like that with the Canada pension plan right now. I don't understand. I can understand, like you said, from the rest of Canada's perspective, why they don't want us to leave. But from an Albertan's perspective, I have no idea why you'd want to, waste your money with the Canada pension plan, and why you wouldn't want to give your children and grandchildren the best opportunity at a foot forward in life.
And that's really what I'm arguing here, is that, there's not a senior out there that's going to lose their pension. That's an impossible thing. That's just not going to happen. Alberta, just on a pay-as-you-go, like I said, we contribute far more than we do pay out. So that's not a risk at all. If anything, you could receive better benefits and or lower contribution rates, or somewhere in between, and a bit of both. So, there is no risk there to the people who are currently receiving a pension plan, which is why I find it so frustrating when you talk to people and they're so adamant about don't touch it, because it's just that familiarity. It's this false sense of security of, in the Canada pension plan. The other one I would say too is a lack of trust in government. And I'm right there with them. I do not disagree at all. 100% do not trust the government. And I don't care whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, or a municipal government. You should be questioning everything that they do. And the reality is, as harsh as it may be, though, if I have to choose between an Alberta provincial government and or a federal government, I'm still going to choose the provincial government. The reason being is, A, you can't change what you don't own, right? And we are never going to change the Canada pension plan. So this is an opportunity for Albertans to basically draft something that's better for Albertans. And it's a new opportunity, absolutely, which is not, unknown, but it's like, could you imagine having a brand new white sheet of paper and saying, here, what would you like to see? Right now, it can't be any worse. It has to be at least the same or better benefits. That's already in legislation. So, that's a given. So you've got nowhere to go but up. And, I think it would be a huge lost opportunity for Albertans not to take it.
I'm for, politics aside, I 100%, my values are to support a person's right to personal autonomy. That's what brought us to Alberta in 2021 during the wake up, or during the height of everything. And, when I hear the Alberta pension plan, or I hear people talk about an Alberta police service, or I hear these sort of things that sound kind of separate. My ears perk up a little bit because I really appreciate a person's struggle for personal autonomy. And if that kind of extends to maybe a province, I'm okay with that too. So kind of laying my cards out on the table, I would be totally okay if Alberta decided at some point to, dissociate in some regard from Canada. What is your opinion on, I guess, Alberta? I don't want to say Alberta separation. I think, but basically Alberta separation, independence, autonomy, maybe joining with some other provinces. How does this all play together? Because I think the pension plan, the different municipal police forces, things like the Sovereignty Act at the start of it all, kind of is starting to lay bricks in the road that could one day be a road to independence. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Well, I'll put it this way, because I've never actively advocated for separation. I still have a lot of family across Canada, and but I am a big advocate for autonomy. And you know what? We as Albertans should be demanding everything that Quebec has. And Quebec has its own police forces, has its own pension, it has its own, transfer payments, it has its own immigration policy. Everything that Quebec has, Alberta should have. And because why? Because it doesn't hurt, right? We in the West get ignored. We get trampled upon, constitutionally all the time. And we have become the cash cow for the rest of Canada. And it's a very abusive relationship, in my opinion. The only way we're going to change that is to take back control over the aspects of our lives that we can control. And an Alberta pension plan is definitely the first step in that. And here's the reality. If we don't do it, wow, it's like Alberta is all bark, no bite. You think that Canada is going to take us serious in anything that we talk about moving forward? Absolutely not. If we can't, as a province, come together and acknowledge the tremendous opportunity we have here and the tremendous benefits that it will offer to not only our current generation, but future generations, we are no threat to the federal government whatsoever. And they will just continue to walk all over Alberta, I think, in a worse way moving forward.
Coming from Ontario to Alberta, it was interesting hearing Albertans' perspectives from Ontarians, and which now I've made my transformation complete, and I have some of those same views, even having been an Ontarian myself. But I like to say, Ontarians don't hate. People think Ontarians hate Alberta. Well, we don't hate Alberta or Albertans. They don't ever think about you at all. And, you never think of you. And so I'm sure that if we exit the CPP and start up an APP, there's going to be a whole lot more thought centered around Alberta. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, we have to do something to get people's attention in the East. And because I think nobody fully understands the extent to which Alberta does fund activities in all of Canada, and not just the Canada pension plan. I mean, you look at the federal payments, 62% of everything we send over in an equalization payment goes to Quebec. I mean, Quebec intentionally omits its hydroelectricity revenue to make it appear as a have-not province. And yet we have to put every dollar of every revenue of our oil and gas into the equation. So there's a lot of shenanigans that go on, and people think that Albertans just like to complain. I have lived all across this country, and I've worked in Ottawa for 10 years. I have graduated from the University of New Brunswick. I went to Dalhousie for a year in Nova Scotia. I was born in Newfoundland and Labrador. I've lived in BC for 2 years. So, I have seen the perspective of pretty much every Canadian and every different province. And the East and the West are truly at odds with one another on so many issues. And it's not a conservative versus a liberal issue. It's there's more of a rural versus
for sure
issue, for sure. But there's just as many conservatives of Ontario as there are in Alberta. But the problem is, like you said, people in Ontario don't stop to even think about the West. Why would they? They're the center of the universe.
Actually, Winnipeg, close to Winnipeg, is the geographic center of Canada. I'll have everyone know. We drove across.
It's Toronto. It's Toronto.
Of course, Toronto's the center of everything. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
You know, I feel like Alberta is Canada's sugar daddy. We give them all our money, and in turn, we allow Canada to screw us, and that's what really feels the arrangement is. So maybe it's time for a financial breakup, you know?
Well, what I've been telling people is we shouldn't be participating in our own demise. If you had gone on to the CPPIB, their website just last year, the first thing you would have seen was welcome to a carbon neutral Canada. They're all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are members of the World Economic Forum. They're all about the ESG. If you look at what they're funding and financing, they had to do 3 environmental climate change models. And, you know, that's not what you should be considering as an investment manager. I want somebody who's competent and capable, who can do the job, right? Who's qualified, who has the experience. And I don't care whether you're black, blue, purple, pink, whether you're Christian, Jew, it doesn't matter to me. Can you do the job? So this whole DEI is bothersome for me. And then the other one with ESG, you know, they're happy to invest in coal in China, but somehow Alberta oil is dirty and you can't invest in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I have real issues about that. So as Albertans, again, imagine Quebec. If the Caisse de Depot came out and said, hey, Quebecers, we're no longer going to finance or fund any hydroelectric projects in Quebec. How long do you think the Quebecers would allow them to continue to manage their money? And yet that's what we do with the Canada Pension Plan. You know, we're participating in our own demise. So let's stop complying and let's bring home what we can and manage it, you know, to our best benefit, not to Canada's best benefit. And, you know, people are worried about the rest of Canada. The rest of Canada is extremely wealthy. Alberta is not the only wealthy province. We've just enabled them to behave badly. We've just enabled them to be able to use our money, to use our resources, so they don't have to actually go out and do anything with their own. Newfoundland and Labrador, I mean, now is one of the wealthier provinces. Why? Because oil and gas. Well, hey, if they want to, you know, continue to contribute to their GDP per capita and standard of living, well, they're going to go find innovative, creative ways. We have to increase productivity in this country. As everybody is now saying, I've been saying it for decades, but everybody is now on board. We're in a productivity crisis. Well, the best way to do that, necessity becomes the mother of all invention, as they say. So if Alberta withdraws its handouts, well, then the other provinces will pick up what they need to pick up and use their own natural resources, their own innovation, their own creativity to fill in the gap. And I have every confidence in other provinces that they will absolutely do that and shine. And hopefully then we have all provinces and the territories firing on all cylinders, and just Canada becomes the greatest, most prosperous, freest place in the world to live and work.
Sounds like a plan to me, Nadine.
There's Nadine's rant for the day.
So anyone out there watching, I see we got a few out there. Please feel free, if you do have any questions, any challenges, whatever the case is, you have the opportunity to put them in your comments. I've only seen the one so far. So if you were satisfied, I'm satisfied, but we'll give them a second there to type in any last minute questions as we sit there silently staring into the camera.
Well, one of the things that we haven't really talked about is independence. So many people think that the Canada Pension Plan is an independent board. And on a day-to-day basis, nobody tells it what to buy. Nobody tells it what to sell. So from that standpoint, there is some independence. But the board is actually appointed by the Minister of Finance. So it's been my experience that he or she who does the hiring has some influence. And in addition to that, I would question, you've seen all the ads and the social media promotions for the Canada Pension Plan right now, and they're coming to Alberta. And well, if you were truly an independent asset manager, why would you be coming here defending the Canada Pension Plan? I'd actually be on the phone with the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, going, yes, Ms. Smith, I understand you may be promoting or you know, preparing to manage your own pension. You should consider us as your asset managers, right? That's what independence looks like. And that's not what's happening. And then you get organizations within the government as well, like OFSI, the Office for Financial Superintendent. They manage all the financial institutions, the banks, the pension plans. And again, they're filled with DEI and policies that have negative impacts on Alberta in particular. But you know, and there's no choice. You still have to follow the regulations, right? So they're not as independent as people would believe them to be, and they are far more politically influenced. And you've seen now pressure coming from private institutions in the what was it, the letter that came from the Montreal businesses, you know, putting pressure on the federal government now for the federal government to put pressure on the pension plans here in Canada to invest more in Canada. Well, Canada is an awful economy right now. I wouldn't be investing, and it's awful not because of, you know, the natural resources and the opportunities. It's awful because of federal regulation and bad policy. And so when you've got unpredictable, unstable, you know, policies, money flees. And that's what we've seen happen in Canada for decades now, is money has just left the country. And especially under this Trudeau Liberal government, nobody in their right mind, you know, would necessarily put big dollars as far as infrastructure projects or pipelines into the country, thinking that, well, hey, the federal government could in 5 years, 3 years, 8 years, pull the plug and or change the terms of the arrangement. So, you know, there's a lot that needs to be fixed.
One last question I will ask you. Oh, we have a comment here, which may be a question. Thank you for all the information. That's the comment. Thank you for all the information. So hopefully our governments get their ish together, but let's just say they don't and they piss away all our money. So as an investment manager, obviously each person is different and unique and custom and all that stuff, but what would you say are kind of maybe the top 3 areas or general portfolio, or what are the general assets that you would advise people take a look at to maybe put their money into, to store it and to preserve it through the coming decade, let's say?
Again, that's almost too broad of a question to realistically answer, because everybody is in such a different circumstance. You know, if you've got a young family just starting out, putting a little extra food like spices and tea, things that you're using and spending every day, you know, that's an investment. Because if you can save $1, right, with inflation the way that it is and food costs and everything going up, if you can save $1 and you're just getting started, you don't have a lot, that's an investment that you're making, and that can't be underestimated. For other people, you know, silver and gold, obviously, if you don't own any, silver and gold is, I don't call it an investment, I call it an insurance policy. You don't need to own much, you know, 10-15% of your net financial assets or net worth, whichever you're more comfortable with, is a great way to insure a portfolio and make sure that you have assets to start with no matter what happens in the world. You know, there'll be opportunities. I think we are going to see some turbulence in the stock market, the public stock markets. Commodities, I think, are going to be pretty solid here for the foreseeable future. So again, it just really depends on the individual person, what you already hold and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Somebody who's 20 has got very different goals and objectives than somebody who's 50, than somebody who's 75. So.
Yeah, awesome. Nadine, thank you. I'm just taking a look at the clock here. I know you are scheduled on another interview just basically in 2 seconds, so I'm going to let you get off here. And you're going to be on with Catherine Kowalchuk. Also, I'm talking about kind of the same topic. So, guys, if any of you want to hear more, you can go right now over to Nadine's Facebook page, where she's posted a link to the interview with Catherine Kowalchuk. We're going to be talking about more of the same, and I really appreciate your time tonight. You have anything else on the go in the works? I know you're traveling. I know you're talking to a lot of people about this. I know you're doing a lot of webinars. Where would you like to direct people's attention more?
So if you go to nadinewellwood.ca, that's my website. You can find some information there, more about me if you wanted me to speak on different events or at different on a different topic even. Also, I am speaking in Cochrane is my next event, my next big speaking event on this particular topic, the Alberta Pension Plan. And that's going to be at the Frank Wills Memorial Hall at 7 o'clock on April 19th, which is a Friday evening. And so we're hoping to pack that. And of course, it's really you know, we saw some of the slides tonight, but I mean, I have many more slides and a lot more, go into a lot more sort of detail and depth, and the crowd is a little bit more interactive, obviously, so we do get a lot more questions. And so that's a great, if you haven't seen one of my presentations, come on out. They are typically fun and entertaining, and they're filled with a lot more information. And so that would be my next event. And then, of course, just keep checking in with the website. If you go in and you log into my website, it'll ask you for a name and an email. And it'll give you a little 2-page handout as well of if you want to just have a conversation with friends or family. Somebody says, yeah, I can't do it. You know, we need to stay with the Canada Pension Plan. There's a little 2-page handout, but you do have to type in your name and your email. And then if you do that, you can download this little 2-pager that you can then use that as to hand to a friend and or use it just for, you know, a topic around the dinner table with kids. A lot of the millennials, and, you know, those are the ones that need to be, you know, hearing this information, but they're so busy trying to live day to day, you know, and get the kids to hockey and school and, you know, get to work on time, that they're the ones that don't typically tend to come out, but they are the ones that have the most, honestly, to gain from an Alberta pension plan. So, you know, parents, grandparents, have that conversation with your kids, with your grandkids. And, you know, let's bring this Alberta pension plan home where it, you know, it will benefit every Albertan.
I was just going to ask, as a point of curiosity, what's the kind of age range that you see coming to these different meetings? I remember in Valley View, we had a sea of silver hairs and like a 14-year-old. So
Yeah.
what do you see across the province?
Yeah, it's primarily a lot of the older silver hairs. And it's really funny. I was in Leduc and I had one older lady look at me. She says, look at me. She says, I'll look around this room, all this gray hair. She's like, well, you shouldn't be talking to us. Why are you talking to us? And I said, well, honestly, I said, you guys are the problem, because it is the gray hairs that are promoting or providing the greatest resistance to this. So I'm glad to see them come out to actually, with an open mind, to have the discussion and willing to consider an Alberta pension plan. But it is, you know, not missed upon me that, you know, the younger generation, even though they typically tend to be more supportive, they don't fully understand why they're supportive or should be supportive of an Alberta pension plan. So hopefully when you come to a meeting, that's what I try to do, is to give you the confidence so that you know the facts and you know why an Alberta pension plan is what we need to do.
Nadine, thank you for your time. Thank you for your information. Thank you for doing what you do. Keep doing it, please. And I look forward to just catching up with you again in the future down the road and seeing how you're doing. I guess everyone, go watch Nadine now as she signs off here and signs on to talk with Catherine Kowalczyk about the Alberta pension plan. Appreciate your time, Nadine.
Thank you, TJ. Have a great night.
You as well. Bye-bye. Bye, Nadine. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, TJ.